Looking back on my time in high school and in college, I really didn't like final exam time. And there were a lot of people getting ready for final exams. Sorry. But I did enjoy the teachers that prior to the final exam week that would give either a really in-depth study guide. Sometimes teachers would give an old final exam itself to help us really get ready for the final. As we end the liturgical year, Advent begins next Sunday. We're really before a final exam as we look at the final judgment, which is the focus of the gospel for this day on Christ, the King of the universe, Sunday. And the gospel opens by Jesus telling us that when the Son of Man comes, he will be seated on his throne in all of his glory with all the angels surrounding him, and he's going to call all the nations to himself, and there will be a judgment. The judgment will be clear. It says he will separate the sheep and the goats, the sheep being the righteous, and the goats on the left being the ones to be sent off to final condemnation. And so what is this final exam? How will we all of us be judged? We will be judged on our love. We will be judged specifically on how we loved the least among us. On this Christ the King Sunday, the King is before us. But our King is hidden. Our King is hidden. How is our King hidden? He tells us in the gospel. Then the King will say, I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. Stranger, and you welcomed me. Naked, and you clothed me. Ill, and you cared for me. In prison, you visited me. The King is talking like this. The King saying he's hungry, thirsty, naked, a stranger, in prison, ill. The King is hidden in the poor. Jesus Christ has hidden himself in the poverty of the human condition. When he became flesh in the womb of the Virgin Mary, as St. Paul tells us in 2 Philippians, for though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself and took the form of a slave. Jesus hid his divinity in the humanity. Jesus Christ became poor. He became a needy person. He's hidden in the poor. He's hidden in human poverty. Our King is in hiding. And this is one of the ways in which he's hidden. Well, what's another way Jesus is hidden? In the Eucharist. Today's a very special day for Isaac Brown. Isaac's going to receive First Communion today. He's hidden in the Eucharist under the humble form of bread, that only with the eyes and ears of faith do we know that it's really Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity, truly, really, and substantially present in the Eucharist. And maybe we've heard the statistics of recent times that very, very, very few Catholics believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. Could it also be that a great number of us do not recognize Jesus Christ present in the poor, in the destitute, in the least, the smallest, the poorest among us? Could that be the case? In fact, to receive Jesus, King of Kings, in the Eucharist, to receive Jesus in the Eucharist commits us to the poor. This is clearly stated in the Catechism. The Eucharist commits us to the poor. To receive Christ in truth, the body and blood of Christ given up for us, we must recognize Christ in the poorest, his brethren. The Catechism continues in another place. Jesus shares his life with the poor From the cradle to the cross, he experiences hunger, thirst, and privation. Jesus identifies himself with the poor of every kind and makes active love toward them the condition for entering his kingdom. I'll say again. Jesus identifies himself with the poor of every kind and makes active love toward them the condition for entering his kingdom. Jesus uses very strong language today to identify himself with the poor. He says, I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was naked, I was sick, I was in prison. He doesn't say I was like a hungry person or like a thirsty person. He says, I am that person. Jesus identifies himself with the poor. How we treat them is how we treat Christ. It can be easy for us to hear this gospel passage this morning, though, and chalk it up to some bland moral exhortation. Something that's nice to hear around Thanksgiving. Something that's nice to hear maybe when we're at some big fundraiser. Maybe the gospel is challenging us to give a little money to the person on the side of the street. Maybe the gospel is challenging us to be generous with charitable organizations. And in these ways, yes, the gospel is fulfilled. But it's more than that. There's a much deeper meaning that unfolds. We are to serve Christ in the least of our brothers and sisters, especially our neighbor most in need. The one closest to us, most in need, we are to serve and love. Christ didn't say, I was hungry and you fed me for a year. He didn't say, I was naked and you filled my wardrobe. He didn't say, I was sick and you cured me. I was in prison and you freed me. No, did we willingly enter into the suffering of another person? He's more concrete, more simple. In the moment of the hungry person before you, did you try to feed them? Try to clothe them? Visit them in their need? God doesn't call us to annihilate poverty, to get rid of it. He asks us to enter it because that's what he did. And so when we think of the poor and the destitute, what first comes to mind may be, in fact, the poor and the homeless on the streets of our city. This is true. How do we serve them? It's difficult. It's risky. It's awkward. How do we serve them? What I try to do is give them food. Buy them drinks from the gas station. I try to give them what they most likely need at that moment. Maybe a grocery card to the grocery store, maybe something to get a sandwich from a fast food restaurant, something. There's no blue book. But what can we do in that moment? What can we do in that moment for the poor? You see, Christ isn't simply just calling us to send our aid through other organizations, though this is beneficial and needed. He wants us to personally serve them any way that we can. It's better to deliver the aid personally than to send it from a distance. So who are the poor and the helpless among us? Yes, the literal destitute, homeless. But maybe the helpless one is a spouse. Maybe the one who needs my time and attention are my children, or a friend, or a coworker, parents, grandparents, someone who's ill, someone who's suffering, depressed, lonely. They're all the poor. They're all in need. People are hungry for food, yes, but they're more hungry for our attention, for our time. People are thirsty for fresh drinking water. Yes, they are. They're also thirsty for love and for human kindness. People are strangers, estranged from family, from friends, from society. How can we welcome them? How do we welcome them? Do we reach out to those who are lonely and unwelcome in our midst? People need clothing. Yes, we need to share and give away our clothing. Give from what we know we can do. But are we protecting people from gossip and hurtful words? Do people feel protected by us, the vulnerable? So we are to love our neighbor in any difficulty. We adore Christ in the Eucharist. We serve Christ in the poor. We adore Christ in the Eucharist. We serve Christ in the poor, in the least of his brethren. The gospel invites us to recognize his own presence in the poor. Jesus says, "As you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me." All the saints live this way. The Holy Father, in speaking about the lives of the saints at a recent audience, said that the saints responded with extraordinary creativity to the devotion to God and their brothers and sisters. They dedicated themselves without holding back to serving the least and assisting the destitute, sick, and the elderly. Their preference for the smallest and poorest was the reflection and measure of their unconditional love for God. In fact, they sought and discovered love in a strong and personal relationship with God, from whence springs forth true love for one's neighbor. They sought and discovered in a strong and personal relationship with God the love that they shared with their brothers and sisters. So when we are filled with the wealth of the Eucharist and filled with the love of God, that's the love with which we are meant to share with one another. A few quotes from the saints. St. Rose of Lima, when her mother reproached her for caring for the poor and the sick at home, St. Rose said to her mother, "When we serve the poor and the sick, we serve Jesus. We must not fail to help our neighbors, because in them we serve Jesus." St. Benedict, in his rule for monks, wrote, "All guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ, for he himself will say, 'I was a stranger and you welcomed me.' All humility should be shown in addressing a guest by a bow of the head or a complete prostration of the body. Christ is to be adored because he is indeed welcomed in them." The saints recognized and served Jesus in the poor, in any human need. And so the one who's before us is the one in need. It can be anybody, because to be human is to be in need. And we are poor. We're the poor ones. We're the destitute, spiritually impoverished. Without God's mercy and his grace, we come here, what's happening? The shepherd king is feeding us, binding our wounds, healing us, loving us. He's serving the least among his brethren. That's you and me. We also are among the poor. "As you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me." This is the solemn judgment by the King of the universe. In the end, we will be judged on our love. The wicked did nothing. They committed the sin of omission. They just did nothing. The righteous served, but both the righteous and the wicked were surprised to learn that in serving the poor, they were serving the king. Both were surprised. But now the Lord has delivered to us the final exam, early, He's told us how to find him, how to serve him. He's told us how we will be judged. He told us exactly how it's going to be. And so the day that we face the final exam, will we pass? May the Virgin Mary help us encounter Jesus and receive him in his word and in the Eucharist, and at the same time to serve our brothers and sisters who suffer in any way from hunger, disease, oppression, loneliness, any type of poverty. For to love and serve them is to love and serve the King of the universe. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.